Welcome, John, to the show. Thank you so much for joining me here. I'm excited to chat with you. Yeah, if you could just introduce yourself, that'd be great, and a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. Yeah, John Lawyer. I am a spiritual guide and life coach. Started a nonprofit online spiritual community a while back, and my background is I grew up in Oklahoma, a small town, rural, and pretty normal childhood. Two parents, the older sister, that kind of thing. And as I grew up, I knew that after high school, college probably wasn't for me. So I decided to enlist in the Army straight out of high school. After I took the ASVAB test and everything to figure out what job I could get, I ended up being a counterintelligence special agent. And this would have been in about uh, 2000. So I joined about a year before 9/11 happened. And by the time I got through, all my training for basic and job and everything, I got to my first permanent duty station about 6 months before 9/11, and then it happened, and I spent probably half my 5-year enlistment in Kuwait supporting troops in Afghanistan. That's where we invaded Iraq from and all that kind of stuff, so pretty intense at times, and when my time started to wind down, I really loved my job, I really loved what I did, and, uh, I kinda had the option to either keep doing what I was doing as a civilian and stay overseas, or I could go home and I could kind of work in Washington D.C. in the Beltway, 9 to 5, fighting traffic twice a day in a cubicle, and I didn't really couldn't see myself doing that. So stayed overseas. My wife was with me. We actually had very similar jobs, and so we went to Baghdad together for over a year and a half, and then we came back for a while, and then I ended up in Kandahar, Afghanistan for uh, a 6.5 year consecutive assignment. So that one was pretty defining for me because it was pretty it was kind of remote from a perspective of what I did, and it was for a long time. So uh, then after that, I'd been out of the first 15 years of my adult life, that had been 12 years in Kuwait, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So I was pretty busted, pretty burnt out, and came home. North Texas is where I live now, and I didn't really know who I was outside of this like driven, mission oriented person that I thought, especially back then, I thought I wasn't, I did an important job, and I was, when I walked into a room, people wanted to know what I had to say and that kind of stuff. So uh, I didn't really have an identity outside that. So I kind of had to figure out, who am I? What am I going to do with my life? And how do I heal from this? I didn't really even know where to start. So, it took me 7 years to kind of get my feet under me and kind of figure out where I was going to go, what I was going to do. And I wasn't a spiritualist or anything like that. I wasn't on a spiritual path per se. I realize now that we're always on a journey, whether we know it or not, but I don't think I knew it then. And a couple years ago, kind of out of the blue, I kind of had a spiritual moment. Like some call it a moment of clarity, awakening, call it different things. And I just kind of understood the universe and the oneness of everything. And I knew that my purpose in life was to kind of help people help themselves find their wholeness, and that I wanted to create a community that I believed we could have authentic, meaningful connection online and the digital age, just like you and I are having a conversation right now. So that's where I am today.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful story. Um, I'm curious about your so-called awakening, right? I feel like a lot of people think it's like a one day thing, like suddenly, you're blown aback, right? And for me, I mean, I've gone through quite a few changes in the past couple of years, and I've sort of come to realize a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, right? But it was for me, it was a a journey, right? It was something that I developed over a period of a year or two. And so, and to be honest, I mean, I've sort of always been interested in the topic, so it's, it's been years of reading as well, sort of culminating to a certain point. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, and I think you would agree that a lot of people think it's like this sudden moment, but in reality, it's a progression. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that happen that lead up to it. I
Hmm.
think some people are on a more intentional path with it, like they're reading, they're more into the um like the
More
periphery of it and
inclined.
understanding it. Yeah, over time. And I think there's people that aren't aware of that, but there's things happening in their lives that are still informing them of something that will happen. So I think that it can be this gradual process. I think for most people, it probably is a gradual process, even if they're not saying like, well, like I'm studying spirituality or I'm studying philosophy, or I'm studying self help or self improvement, which I see all those as very similar things. So I think it's a process of things and events that happen to us over a long period of time throughout our whole life that prepare us for that. And so I believe I do agree that it's this gradual thing. I think for some people I think some people probably who didn't kind of weren't more intentional and aware about it, it might just pop and then they're like, "Oh, okay. I see why this happened." So yeah, I think that what you're saying, that perspective, I think it can apply to pretty much anyone and how they kind of come to realize they're on the path or they're on a journey.
I see. So you're saying maybe if you're not so enveloped in this world and reading self-help books and all this things, then maybe it is more of a possibility that it's a sudden occurrence.
I Yeah, for me, like I said, like my sister was spiritual, so I was exposed to it uh to an extent. My wife has some spiritual leanings as well. And so I was exposed to that. And I think that made a difference. But I wasn't when it happened to me, I wasn't familiar with like the um all the details of it. I wasn't familiar with the vocabulary of how to speak about it. I had to go read a lot of books to catch up so that I could communicate with people about it in a warmer way. I want to be able to talk to people like I'm talking to you today about things like this. And so I had to go back. I think I read 60 books in 4 months just so I could better talk to people about it. And I took notes and I really buckled down so I could educate myself so that I could have conversations about it with anyone kind of in the spiritual, religious, philosophical
Mhm.
realm, self help as well.
Yeah, if you've ever read The Power of Now, which I mean, it's become
Yeah.
more, I'm sure you have, it's become more commonplace now. Uh, I never thought it would be, but there you go. He does mention that he had just sort of he was like 30 years old or something, and he's just had this night where he woke up and could see clarity. But I'd say that's out of the norm, rather than most people. But
Yeah. I don't think it's very
um,
common.
But what you were saying about communication, I appreciate because that's something that I've always felt about, say, the Bible or say any religious text is, you know, first of all, you have to take the context of when it was written and the level of consciousness that maybe that people had at the time, right? So, which is why I love Eckhart Tolle, right? Like he puts things into a more modern perspective, and let's and sort of communicates these ideas in a different way that is more all encompassing, right? He'll take like Indian texts or the Bible and the Quran
Right.
and various texts, right, and sort of put them into a modern context that's more digestible nowadays, I would say.
No, I love that you say that because I think that spiritualists, like, and people really think that, oh, well, spirituality is way different than religion. And I think in a lot of ways it is. But at the same time,
Hmm.
like you said, a lot of what Tolle's saying, a lot of what Michael Singer is saying, or Brene Brown, or any of these people, Tony Robbins, one of the, the original self help guy, like, it all goes back, it all goes back to the Bhagavad Gita and the writings of Lao Tzu and the Tao and the Pali Canon of Buddha and Jesus Christ and the New Testament. And uh, we may not always see it when we're reading these self-help, self-improvement books, and we might not see it as a new age modern spiritualist, but I think it very much is influenced by the ancient uh, teachings of the great um, spiritual figures.
Mm. And so before I forget, I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned when you were sort of telling us a little bit about your journey. Um, you said that you had gone through four, I'd say, what was it, 8 years in the counterterrorism group, and you said after you were getting out of it, you were sort of had this feeling of you had just been on sort of a go 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 mode for a better part of a decade, right? And I'd say that that is something that a lot of men have in common. I think the way, especially that men in particular are raised, they're sort of told that you need to produce, you need to, um, be of value, right? So then they sort of go into their first, phase of their life, if you will, and with that mentality of go go go, um, and it sort of does them an injustice because they never have the opportunity to, um, sort of explore what it is that they want to bring to the world and what they wanna share of themselves, with the world, right? Um, and I just wanted to, get your perspective there.
I think that's a really good perspective on sometimes we are driven by society and culture to go and be busy and do work and get involved in these things. And I very much feel like there's an aspect of lost youth for sure to it. I think there's, and especially if you become this driven professional in whatever field. For me, I was a soldier and then, a civilian at war. And so all that time that I spent, I was working 110 hours a week, 7 days a week, 365 for all those years. Um, I felt like I think I felt like I had something to prove to myself, and I was idealistic and believed that I wanted to help the world and that I had something to prove probably in some way. I don't It's not an
Mhm,
exact way to say it, but it's close to something closer to that. And so that it and then you dedicate yourself to this and you get lost in that system of the grind. For me it was the military industrial complex that that was the grind, but for other people it could be exceeding at a specific job or at college or a career beyond that. And then you wake up and you're like, damn, I'm 35 now. Where did it all go? um yeah, I think we don't value stopping and saying, who am I, what are my values, what are my beliefs, what do I think outside of what I've been told to think or told not to think, or what I'm doing or told not to do, and all that.
mm. Yeah, and I would mm, and just to touch back, I mean, I did say that it happens often to women, but, in the modern ages sorry, I said that it happens often to men, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen to women as much as,
Sure.
insofar as the modern world that we live in, right? They're taking more part of, um, sort of a on onboarding more of a masculine identity and such, but, um, it's, you know, somebody that comes to mind is, there's, I don't know if you've ever read any of Alison Armstrong's, um, books, sort of on she touches on a myriad of different topics, but, one of the things she has a book that sort of touches on phases of manhood, right? And she sort of describes, um, when you're very young, you're just sort of a young boy making a disaster, right? She calls it the page phase. And then suddenly you go into the prince phase, which is sort of the phase that we're talking about now, where you're just go, 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 where you're just, well, she's describing it as you're just having as much fun as you can possibly have, and sort of without any much priorities. And then you go into the oh, sorry, that was the night. And then you go into Prince phase, which is the I need to work as hard as I can to, once I figure out what I want to bring to the world, you go, go, go. And then you sort of hit this maybe what colloquially we might call the um, midlife crisis. And after a few years of going through that, you sort of go into the quote unquote king phase where you're a little bit more calm and I'd say centered, right? So that just came to mind, but I don't know if you have any reflections on that at all, or maybe what stage you identify with.
You know, yeah, stages of life and like where we are from a mature perspective and development perspective is, I think, really interesting
Hmm.
because I think we can have all this knowledge, right? We can learn all this stuff, right? But knowledge is just knowledge and it transmutes through experience to wisdom, right? But we have to have that experience to transmute that knowledge into to wisdom. And yeah, the older we get, the wiser we get, I think, most of the time. And we can be in, I've always kind of felt like I was an old soul. I don't think this is my first time, doing this thing. Uh, but even if you're an older soul and even if you think you're wiser when you're young, you still have a lot to learn. And you realize that as you get older, you're like, "Oh, I did have a lot to learn. Even if I was mature, even if I was an old soul, I still have a lot to learn in this lifetime." And I think we do develop those stages of life where, we realize, you start to realize what's important to you, what's important to your life, what's important for you to do and be in this world. And I believe that meaningfully changes over time for sure.
I think anybody that's into spirituality, uh, in any sense of the word, is already an old soul, to some degree. So
Yeah, it takes
yeah,
time. Yeah, right. It takes universally, it takes time for sure.
yeah, and I mean, you have to be can be a double edged sword, but you have to be sort of a self reflective person to come to some of the realizations um, that that we're talking about, and they're not easy realizations to come to, and you have to, and like when I think of these philosophers, I don't know, Marcus Aurelius and Aristotle, fill in the blank, you know, or even more modern, like Carl Jung or something like that. Like these are difficult things to think about, right? Like, uh, and I'd say that I don't know if they're the happiest people, to be honest. Sometimes I always think that, but I mean, they brought us forward in philosophy and thought, and that was their contribution to us, right? But like I said, I think there's a double edged sword, and you can maybe go a little too far sometimes. So you can't be thinking about this stuff all the time. So
No, we got to have fun. I think. Yeah, I recently, I just did a video on this. That
mm,
spirituality isn't this like abstract thing. It's touchable. You can touch it. It's and it's about having joy in your life. It's about uh, I think it's about not holding on too tight. And if we search for it too hard, we'll never find it. Right? Like we'll never. Or if we even have a concept of it, I've seen it, I've touched it, I've experienced it in a moment or a few moments. Now I'm trying to get back to that place, right? Like
mm,
I've read a lot of different stories of people in their spiritual path, right? But it really, for me, it's about, it, I don't think spirituality has to be this lonely, painful, suffering, journey,
right,
right? I,
right.
I appreciate the Buddhists. I really do. Um, but I think sometimes people, and it happens to youth more than I think it happens to people that are older, but I think they think it has to be suffering. It has to be painful. I think that exists. I think sometimes that path is going to be difficult. It's going to be hard, but yeah, we can reach out and touch this thing that is spirituality, that is our spiritual self. It's warm, it's joyful, it's peaceful, and we can embrace that and have fun. It doesn't have to be this always neutral thing. I do believe that we are walking the balance in between dark and light. And we are, if the universe is balanced, we are the universe and we are the balance. But we have a choice of whether we dwell on the dark or look at the light. And I think that's our own choice. That's our own decision.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, difficulty, quote unquote difficulty, or um, stress that you go through in your journey, it all comes from within, right? I mean, it's all any resistance is created
Resistance, yeah.
internally. I think that's the
Right.
word, right?
Yeah.
It's all created internally, so it's in at the end of the day, which is empowering because then you can realize that hey, it's all within me,
Right.
and that's a pretty pervasive thought. I am sure you would agree that any
Yeah.
problem you have really comes from within rather than without. So um, it's something that you're in control of. But I guess my point, and a friend of mine recently told me this. She was reading The Power of Now, right? She's like, "Well, I'm exhausted of all this self help stuff." Um,
Right.
you know, and it sort of stuck in my mind. And it's true, it can happen, right? So then I guess that was my suggestion, right? It's like you know that's also resistance that you're creating within yourself
Yeah.
to just let go, or be calm, and enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
It's all uh, just attachment, right? So
Yeah, if you're trying too hard to live in the moment, you're not gonna live in the moment, right?
yeah, right. I mean, you you can't try to live in the moment. It's a conundrum there. That's sometimes hard to put
Yeah.
into words,
No, I
but
get that. I absolutely get that.
so, could you just explain a little bit more about what happened after you finished up with uh, the military industrial complex part of your life, as you put it?
Yeah, you know, once I was done with, the thing about war is like when I got home, like I still kind of needed it, right? But
Mm,
it had I think being part the military industrial complex does a lot of good around the world. First of all, I will caveat that. However, there's always the but there's this
mhm.
dark thing about it, right? And when you're a part of that darkness, and even maybe a part of evil sometimes, like it's pretty dark. But it gives contrast. You start to see, oh, there's light over here, and notice it. And I actually went to the VA and asked for help. And my therapist actually, it's funny you mentioned Power of Now when you first started talking about all this, because she gave me the Power of Now, and I was like, I read it, and back then, like I was so broken, it didn't mean anything to me. I was like, I couldn't wrap myself around it. Um, Obviously, I read it again later on, and much different reaction to it.
It's
But
not a good place to start, in my opinion.
no, no, it's very technical, actually.
Yeah.
Something. I mean, even something like Michael Singer's "Untethered Soul" is a little bit
Mhm.
simpler. I think Tolle does a great job, but it's a very instructional, technical approach to being present, kind of, in my opinion. But yeah, my therapist, she was very into Eastern faith and uh, practices, and so she taught me mindfulness, and uh, I wasn't able to wrap myself fully into that either, but mindfulness did help me a little bit, and I was able to kind of absorb some of it. I think that helped me along the way and would serve me years later. So I was really, like I said, lost for 7 years. I was kind of trying, like I said, trying to figure out what I was going to do and who I was and all that. So I was yeah, I was just wondering. I kinda, like, wondering I came out of the desert, but I was still kinda wondering the desert, or I was, like, crossing this swamp of sadness and, like, trying not to get sunk in it, and it's, that just took a long time, and I think time helps. I think time does heal all wounds. It's true. Time really helps a lot. And one of the things that I did before I kinda had my spiritual moment, I did come to a point where I was like, "You know what? I'm attached to all this outcomes. I'm attached to what happens tomorrow and what happened yesterday." I'm like, "I'm just gonna stop caring." So I stopped caring. I didn't stop caring about life per se. I just stopped caring about what happened. It was a very, liberating thing. It wasn't spiritual. It was spiritual, but I didn't know it was spiritual. And I think that preceded my kind of moment of clarity that would happen a couple years later, 2 or 3 years later. And that's a very liberating thing, this idea of letting go or surrender. I think we talked about it a little bit today. But when you let go and you surrender, like amazing things happen because that severs attachments to outcomes and to what you think should happen in life, because life rarely happens the way that we think it should.
I think you can. sort of set goals, right? Because that's maybe something that
Yes,
people
yeah, that's the
confuse, and I
complicated.
just wanna yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that because letting go and surrendering doesn't mean that we still can't have goals, be driven. I think that goes back and connected back into if you're going to let go and surrender, what's important that you do along with that is figure out what your higher purpose is. Because then, if you know what your higher purpose is, go be dedicated to that. Be attached to that. Being attached to your higher purpose, that's a beautiful thing.
Mm.
That's the so if you know what your higher purpose, your dharma is, then you can be driven in that, and then you're going to be doing what's aligned with your mind, body, and soul. And suddenly, life is this very cool, kind of awesome thing.
Yeah, and there's a sense of freedom, right? In that, I think oftentimes when you can align yourself with your goal, if you're, if you're truly honest with yourself about what your goal is and you've detached, uh, or as you, or yeah, if you just let go, as you said, um, then there's a sense of freedom which a lot of people are looking for, I'd say, especially nowadays. But it's a difficult thing because oftentimes your goal don't align with societal expectations, and right. So that societal pressure, depending, and some cultures I've noticed have that um, sort of enmeshed a little bit more in the culture than others. I'd say. I mean, my family's from Central America, and, like, it's a little bit more palpable down here where there's, like, certain societal expectations, as opposed to the US where I grew up, where it's still you can feel it, but it's a lot more acceptable, to maybe take a different path, and, I would from my travels, I'd say it varies upon culture, uh, but definitely so.
Yeah, I do believe that it does vary from place to place, and I think that's important to realize that, like, humans aren't a monolith, right? And different societies and cultures teach and different things and support different values and beliefs that are, it's going to lead to a very different experience and perspective. And perspective is really
Mm.
important.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to set your own values, right? It's like,
Yeah,
what do I believe? And,
yeah,
it takes a little bit of consideration. I'd say it's not an easy thing I mean, it's not an easy thing to think of or to establish, and then to follow, to go against the flow, a little bit in that, can also be difficult, so, yeah. But it goes back
yeah.
to not being attached, right? So,
No, yeah, I it's yeah, that idea of not going with the flow, I call that society's stream of unconsciousness. It's this pull of society to do what society tells you to do, what they want you to do, what they tell you that you should do. And so, yeah, if you stop floating down the stream of unconsciousness and you decide I'm going to be conscious within myself, you get to decide, okay, now, yeah, what are my values? What are my beliefs? A lot of people couldn't even write them down if you asked them. And if you
they
look
would probably write
around,
down the ones that they were told, so.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, and then we get to see look around and see what the world looks like from our perspective, and it's this beautiful thing. It's kind of scary, but but it's this beautiful thing that we can see if we just step off the conveyor.
Mm. Yeah, it sort of comes to mind, I think it may be an evolutionary thing, right? Because I was watching some kind of speech from Jeff Bezos, and he was saying how humans aren't intrinsically truth seekers. It's easier to just go with the flow. I like that what you just said about the flow of unconsciousness. Um, but yeah, we're not truth seekers. Because if you think thousands of years ago, it's easier to just go with what the rest of the tribe was saying, because if you went against it, then you could end up being alone. And so, to a degree, a lot of this stuff feels unnatural because it is unnatural. I mean, it's not, um, it, it's what needs to be done now, but isn't necessarily what was evolutionarily ingrained in us, as a younger species, for lack of better words. So,
Yeah, Yeah, we're communal animals too. Like
Mm.
it is part of how we're made up. And
Yeah, we don't wanna be ostracized.
yeah, and it's, that, we're we're tribalistic as well. And it's what tribe are we choosing? Are we choosing our tribe based on what we tribe that we want to pick, or are we picking the tribes that we're told to pick?
Mm. But especially nowadays with such a global world, you can find your tribe. If you're authentic,
Yeah.
then you can
Just
find
go
your
look for
tribe,
it.
right?
Yeah, just
Right,
go look
right.
for it. Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. Like, I have great hope in humanity and humankind. I think we're gonna be okay. And like you said, like we have the sum of all human knowledge in our pocket on our phone, and we can say what we want, and we can talk to who we want, and we can find all this stuff out if we just go look for it. So yeah, that's a beautiful thing to be able to go and experience all of the different offerings around the world all at one time.
Mm. So, what's a suggestion that you might have, um, for somebody that is trying to find their purpose, right? Because it's often in a sort of an abstract thing. It's like, "Oh, go find your purpose," or,
Yeah,
if you what is that saying? "If you find your purpose, you won't work a day in your life," or something like that.
that's true.
But or do what you love and you won't work a day in your life. But I think a lot of people get overwhelmed trying to find their purpose. I'm curious if you have any suggestions in that.
Sure. I spend a lot of time talking about purpose and higher purpose and kind of like the Hindu idea of dharma. I think it's the same thing. If I think, yeah, first it's yeah, how do I find it? I think a lot of people have a sense of it, an essence of, okay, well, like, what do you love? Like, if think about, I think constructively, you can say, what happens in my life that I can't wait to go to sleep so I can wake up and do it the next day. Um, Other people may have some idea about what lights you up. They may see it when you're experiencing something or you're doing something that you love completely. You might not even see it completely, but other people might be able to see you and say, "Oh man, you light up when you do this." So I think there's an essence we can get of it from ourselves, and there's an essence we can get from other people, and it's about being more in tune with yourself. Some people will find it more easily. Some people may need to reflect on it, meditate on it, journal about it, talk to themselves out loud, which, I think the verbal spoken word has great power. Um, all these things can help you to come to an idea of what your higher purpose is. And I think our higher purpose can change throughout life. So I think we should be aware of that. I have a different higher purpose today than I had when I was at war. I was living my higher purpose then and didn't know it, but it was my purpose at the time. Um, so I think it can change, and we have to keep all that in mind as we're searching for it. And then once we get an essence of it, and we can pull the tail and figure out, okay, this is where I'm going with this. This is what I'm meant to do in the universe, in this world. Then you have to ask yourself that question: how do I align that constructively with my mind, body, and soul? How do I align that with my daily life, especially? We're not most of us aren't going to live in the foothills of the Himalayas and live in a monastery, right? So, how do I intersect my spiritual path and my way of being with this day to day reality that I share with all these other people? And if you can start to think about how you, like you said, if you're living your purpose, if you're doing that thing, then you don't work a day in your life. How do you make that a reality? So get the essence of it, pull that tail, figure it out. And then how do you put that into your life? How do you, uh, and there's some just hard decisions that have to be made. This is not a black and white thing. Like, I might be working a six-figure job that I don't love, but it gives me the freedom to pursue my higher purpose every day outside of my job. 'Cause I'm making 6 figures. Or it might be that I'm making $25,000 a year working in Montana at a ranch, room and board, and I get to see big sky and do my thing, and that may be, so there's a idea of each person has to decide, how do I connect that higher purpose with the way I'm living? And it gets complex when you have a spouse, when you have children and other dependents, how do I integrate them into me living my higher purpose in a way that is good for all of us? Because if I'm living my purpose, I'm probably going to be happier and more joyful. And so they're going to be happier and more joyful. So, where is that equation and how do you solve it? And I think each person's going to come up with a different solution for X.
Mm. I think what you said there at the end, um, a lot of people could identify where they feel like they have responsibilities towards
Yes.
their family, and then they can't pursue their higher purpose. But I think you're doing them an injustice by not pursuing it. Um, if if you want to be fully present and really give what you need to in this world, or give what um give what is needed, and sort of live for others, because there's a feeling of needing to live for others, right? I mean, that's what sort of the source, I would say, from of wanting to work maybe a job that you don't like to provide for your family and such. But I think it is it's maybe short-sighted, right, um to say that you should do what is needed. I don't know
Right.
if that made any sense. So, um, you might bring even more to the world if you just had a little bit more faith, and I don't mean like religious faith for anybody listening, but just faith in the universe, right? I mean, they're all intertwined, but still.
Yeah. 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 No, I
So,
love that. No, you're absolutely right. I love your note on faith too. I actually said that in one of my YouTube videos yesterday. I was like, when I say faith, guys, I just mean faith in yourself and the
right,
universe,
right.
not in a religious sense. So
Yeah, yeah. Many definitions to the word, but continuing on, I guess. And sort of anecdotally, I don't know, I going to mention this earlier, where I actually just went. Yeah, I know you said you were in Kuwait, but I was traveling Southeast Asia, and I had a layover in Qatar. Um, and Yeah, I think I haven't been culture shocked very often in my life, and that was a culture shock.
yeah, I've been
So
there. I've been to
it
Qatar
was
as well. Yeah, it's an
okay.
interesting
So
place.
maybe you know what I'm talking about, but I remember I walked out. It was like 3 in the afternoon or 2 in the afternoon. I had just gotten off my flight, and walking around sort of the market area in the old part of town, because there's like sort of the skyscraper, super modern part of town. But I was staying in the old part of town, and it was just empty. Um, and then it was, as soon as the sun went down, the city came to life, which makes complete sense, in the desert. So it's just a
Yeah,
cultural thing. But but yeah, definitely culture shock for me there. So I don't know.
yeah.
Um, Having spent so much time there, is there something you took away from sort of the culture?
I when I was a kid, I had watched Lawrence of Arabia, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to be Lawrence, and so it was interesting to go. Be careful what you wish for because that's where I ended up. It's that's the universe sending me what I asked for. I have a deep appreciation for the Arabic people and for the Islamic faith, and being around it for so many years. I got to live amongst the people for a while in Kuwait. I actually lived in an apartment in town, uh, plain clothes and had a car and all that. So I got to, and I got to experience it. And as counterintelligence, I got to go talk to them and be with them and go out in the desert and eat with them. And uh, yeah, they're really interesting people, and it's uh it's just different. And we don't have any we and it's very tribal. It's very there's kind of a not a nomadic um, in full description of that word, but there's an essence of it's I don't know, it's a more free flowing thing. Sometimes almost an easier approach to life sometimes that I experienced being around them.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I think it was a rich experience for me.
Can you explain a little bit more what you meant by nomadic? I mean, they are, as a culture, nomadic, right? The Arabian
Yeah,
Peninsula.
I mean the Bedouin,
So
yeah, the
you can
Bedouin
s
style, yeah, it's
right.
that it's that they're not too, I don't know, it almost seems like they're not too attached to, um, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost ineffable, but there's an easiness to them, on their approach to life.
Mm.
It seems more chill, uh, in a lot of ways.
I
I guess
see.
is a way to say it. So, um,
Yeah.
that they're taking life less seriously than a lot of people that I met. Like the whole
Mm.
idea of like inshallah, right? Like God willing, like
Mm.
it will be what it will be. They say that all the time. And so you hear inshallah, like you'll hear it like 50 times a day if you're
Right,
there.
right.
And that just
I
means
love
God
that
willing. It
saying
means
actually.
that what will be, right? You know, it is what it is.
Mhm. Yeah, so maybe they just have um they're more attached to outcome, I guess, if 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 for a lack of better words. But I do remember I went to, where was it that I went? Tunisia once, also another Arab country. And you could and it was almost like a clash, right? Because you're like, "No, let's do this, then this," or you're, like, haggling at the market, and you get frustrated, and it's it's definitely, and they're very relaxed and never on time, and you know what I mean? There's cultural, differences, and maybe less more so there than maybe in, Qatar, UAE, and Kuwait, right? I mean, these are pretty, high functioning countries, but as compared to Tunisia, um, but I know what you're saying. So, so what is, I guess, have you read the Quran, for example?
I've read parts of it. I haven't read it. I haven't read it all the way through, but I read stuff. I especially have an affinity for like the Sufi mystics, and so I read Rumi and
Mm,
some of the I've read some other stuff on Sufi Islam, and I like I said I've never read it straight through. I actually haven't read the Bible straight through either, but I've read a lot of the I grew up Southern Baptist, so I've had plenty of Bible, but yeah, I've I used to actually when I was in Kuwait, I've gone to like religious gatherings and like heard like Shia moms give their message and all that kind of stuff. So I've been, you know,
in English?
no, in Arabic.
Right. Right, right, right. I would assume so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, do you speak Arabic?
No, like
Oh,
a little
okay,
bit
okay.
like shui, like
Right,
just a
right.
little bit of, but not too much. But
Right, right.
my boss spoke Arabic. Um,
Interesting.
and so when we would go out, he would be able to speak to pretty much
Mm,
anybody.
right, right. Yeah, a lot of the people I just ask because some of the times the people in the counterterrorism group, uh, they speak Arabic for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But but beautiful. Um, and so other than Kuwait, so did you come straight back to sort of Kansas and US, or did you uh, go
Yeah.
somewhere else or on?
I left Kuwait and then I was home. I was finishing my last year in the army.
Mm,
And then my wife and I pretty much went right back to Iraq, to Baghdad, and spent 18 months, a little over 18 months in Baghdad.
mm, wow. Okay,
Between that was between Kuwait and Afghanistan. So,
I see.
uh, yeah, Baghdad was an interesting experience as well.
Were you sort of in the city, or?
I was in the green zone for the most part.
Mm,
Like I drove, like we would go to Iraq ministries and meet with people and talk to people and back and forth uh from our where we were based in the green zone at the presidential palace and stuff. We would go back and forth to the airport. We would go downtown to ministries. So I mean I've seen Baghdad from the ground, from the air, and all that, and met with Iraqis and stuff. My dad actually he wasn't there with me or anything, but he was there at the same time I was. He actually lived in the red zone. He lived out in Baghdad. So,
for work as well, or?
yeah, he and his business partner, they were doing contracting stuff for logistics, and they had a house out in the red zone. They were crazy. They're crazy.
Interesting. I'm sure he has some good stories then.
He does.
Fair enough. So what about now? sort of you can you speak a little bit more about your community and sort of where people can join and what type of work that entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So our community, we like I said, we created it so people could kind of share their journeys with each other, and regardless of whatever their practice or philosophy or faith was, um, we could all come together and talk about it at the same time. So if you believe this and I believe that, that's great. Let's just ask questions and see answers. And uh, I think it's this our spirituality is this fiercely individual thing, and we should be empowered within it within ourselves. And but we can do that together, and we have places where people can chat about that every day online. We have Zoom calls where we have conversations like you and I are having right now, and we have guided meditations and affirmations and journaling prompts, that kind of stuff that just helps people kind of figure out, hey, who am I and where am I going with this and all that. And we also offer individual spiritual guidance and coaching to help people out. It's nonprofit; everything goes back into the membership and to help the community. And it's the community is called Kishar. It's named after the Sumerian goddess of Mother Earth or like Gaia, you know. So uh, I've always been pretty in tune with nature and that kind of thing. And it's at kishar.org. It's KISHAR.org. And that's the entrance to our community. And it's got links to our socials. We have a pretty cool YouTube channel that is open to the public, and uh, it just gives our perspective on different spiritual philosophies and religions around the world and books that we've read. And it's a good place to start if people are looking for a place to start.
Beautiful. And I always ask, what are mm, 3 books that you would recommend uh, for the journey? And don't feel pressure to give 3. If it's 2 or 1 or 5, just
Sure.
go for it.
No, I
So,
love that question. Um,
okay, great.
the first one would be it's called The Spiritual Teachings of Ramana Maharishi.
Okay.
And it's a Hindu oriented book. And there's a foreword in that, a version of that book that was written by Jung, by Carl Jung. And so I would recommend that version because Jung's introduction to Marishi's work is amazing. Um, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a Anishinaabe Native American, and it kind of goes into the fact that we aren't in nature, we are nature, and some of the indigenous practices of Native Americans, the Anishinaabe tribe, and beautiful work. And the third one, it's kind of a wild card. There's a lot of stuff. I think the spiritual teachings or the meditations of Marcus Aurelius is always a good place. I think, I call it the 2,000-year-old self-help book. So I think that's a good
Yeah, and
place
it's
to start as
quite
well.
short, actually.
And it's easy to read.
It's an easy read, so yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I suggest that one to people often for that reason. But but beautiful. Sounds good to me.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you jumping on with me here.
Yeah,
John,
same.
it was great chatting. And yeah, I'll find you on socials and such and share your community.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.